It's truly a pleasure to have Dr. Pablo Ramos joining us this morning. And for those of you who are relatively new to this church, Dr. Ramos is the pastor of San Esteban Church in West Valley City. And his congregation and ours have been trying to forge a relationship as sister congregations over the past number of years. Although Pablo and I are very close, bringing our congregations together has encountered a few not insurmountable obstacles that we will kind of touch on as the morning progresses. We did have a wonderful joint service at San Esteban a couple of years ago, followed by an absolutely fabulous dinner there and a wild dance. We had about 60 or 70 people from our congregation who attended. It truly was a wonderful evening. Over the years, this church has taken up some Thanksgiving collections to help members of San Esteban, a congregation comprised mostly of undocumented workers. We also provide a Sub for Santa experience at Christmas, which is always, for us, a very meaningful experience as we shop for families who would otherwise have no Christmas at all. A sister relationship with the church is it really needs a reciprocity. It's kind of a give and take, and we're working towards balancing that equation. Now, Pablo and I may be sisters, but we still have a challenge ahead of us in leveling the playing field so it's even possible for a congregation of great privilege to share common ground with a congregation that struggles constantly just to survive from one day to the next. And so Pablo and I are working on bringing these congregations even more closely together socially. And right now, I'm just going to give you a hint. It involves food, just so you know. I'm just going to whet the appetite. As you will hear in Pablo's message to us this morning, his ministry to his congregation is, I'm looking for a word other than special, but it really is a special kind of ministry. And it is in concept quite similar to what is called liberation theology. Liberation theology developed in Latin America during the many military dictatorships there in the 1960s and 70s. The term liberation theology was actually coined by a Peruvian priest, Gustavo Gutierrez, in 1971. And so Pablo will comment on his work with his congregation. My task is to offer a thumbnail sketch of what liberation theology actually means. Let me begin by placing this concept into a contemporary and Anglo context. About a week ago, I'm sure many of you, not all of you, but many of you have followed this in the paper, the very populist candidate running for mayor in New York, Bill de Blasio. You will learn, at least during the time of the course of the primary, we have learned that he is a real genuine champion for the poor, and he's eager to siphon off some corporate wealth to improve the lives of the disenfranchised. And so this advocate for the poor, just last week, met with New York's plutocracy, the moguls and financiers, met with them in the glassy headquarters of Viacom just off Times Square. And the reason for this meeting was to calm their jittery nerves. They're not real comfortable about this advocate for the poor becoming mayor in New York. And so they had this meeting, and by all reports, it did not go too well. I mean, here he is, really a champion for those who have little or nothing, meeting in a boardroom together with the CEO of Goldman Sachs. There were bankers from Blackstone. Rupert Murdoch was there. And what became really apparent was that their contrasting worldviews made it really impossible to erase some of the worries that permeate the upper 1%, because that 1%, is always so deeply concerned whenever the conversation moves towards a redistribution of wealth. Kind of, can we frame that in a different way? If de Blasio met with these corporate giants, and you got to realize that it's not really all that different in the religious world. So here's the corporate world, but there's also a corporate religious world. And if he had met with, Goldman Sachs and all those people and talked about the role of religion in making Jesus' teachings more relevant to the poor, and he spoke to them about how God's compassion for the poor is indeed our responsibility, why then this aspiring mayor might well be considered a liberation theologian. Liberation theology seeks liberation of the world's poor from unjust economic and social conditions. Liberation theology interprets Scripture through the plight of the poor. It offers a critique of society, exposing the multiple systemic issues that lead to an unjust distribution of power, wealth, and privilege. So imagine liberation theologians and priests that were working that kind of theology, working so closely with what they call base communities of about 100 poor people all through Latin America. Can you imagine them meeting with the Vatican Corporation these past 40 years? Somebody's trying to reach me. So obviously the business of the Vatican, I'm not picking on Roman Catholics of the Vatican, but the business of the Vatican is discernibly different from that of the priest and the theologian working with the poor. But from Pope John Paul on down, the Vatican dismissed liberation theology as simply mixing Marxism with Catholic theology. Well, yeah, that's kind of what it is. We're reminded in today's brutal battles over the extension of Medicaid and affordable health care. So we're reminded that here in the secular realm as well, any progress towards lending support to the poor can be crippled when the powerful, the elite, those in power, are able to frame the help to the poor as being leftist in origin. So this applies to ecclesiastical politics as well as secular politics. But a few weeks ago, Pope Francis did meet with Gustavo Gutierrez, a hopeful sign that the tensions between the corporate church and the church's servants might be bridged, and whatever tension might well be easing. But here's the issue. Corporate powers in the church insist on transcendent salvation as preferable to earthly happiness. Now, this has always proven a convenient way of continuously oppressing the poor, holding out for them the prospects of a better life once they die. So they're kind of saying, no, ignore those people in 8-bedroom mansions. The poor shall dwell in their own mansions in heaven as long as you don't cause any trouble in this world. For liberationists, sin is focused on institutional compliance with a system that not only favors the wealthy, but keeps the poor down and suppressed, keeps the poor as part of the very marginalized. For the corporation, be it the Vatican or Wall Street, sin is a matter of individual offenses, not institutional offenses. A major term that underlies liberationist thinking is preferential options for the poor. And since the poor are believed to be a channel of God's grace, God is revealed as having a preference, an actual preference for these people who are deemed by society as either insignificant, marginalized, needy, and powerless. So this is kind of interesting because our own high U.S. Supreme Court is going to take on the subject very soon of open admissions, preferential options for the poor, one might say. And I think that they're going to go along pretty much with the corporate idea, and so preferential options for the poor, open admissions, will never see the light of day. Because their contention is that in the land of the free, nobody should be given a preference. Everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed in America, or at least so it is believed. The big difference between liberation priests working on behalf of the poor and the powerful leaders sitting in their headquarters boils down to how God is disclosed. For the working priests, God is disclosed in praxis. For the corporate folks, God is disclosed in doctrine. And hence the stark contrast between Pope Benedict, who has written many, many books about Catholic doctrine, and Pope Francis, who thus far has emerged as a pope who actually acts on behalf of the poor. But the nuts and bolts of it comes down to, of course, redistribution of wealth, which seems to threaten those who always have something to lose. Now, even among those in religious leadership and power, it's hard to conceive that there is an unwillingness to level the playing field because of the personal costs that they might incur. They will thwart all efforts to ensure dignity among the poor in order to preserve the status quo, keep things as they are. For me, offering a preferential option for the poor is what real religion is all about. Maybe, and this is just a wild thought, but maybe religions without a doctrine to safeguard can move more easily, move untethered into the business of working on behalf of the poor, just as God intended.